Yeah, hello everyone. Welcome to another live stream in this channel. If you're new here, my name is Kelvin, and yeah, in this video I'll be going through something a little bit different, but I'll be starting a series in the couple of live streams after today. So it's gonna be live sound 101 or basically audio engineering 101 in general, and I'll be going through the fundamentals of audio engineering, the very basics, starting with a topic today. What is sound? So it looks very basic, and I know a few of you in the channel already have lots of experience to sound engineering and audio, but trust me, there are lots of things you can learn from topics like this that go very much into the basics of sound engineering or into the physics of the whole sound engineering bit. So I'm very interested in this series and in how go about it. What I'll be covering in most of this series, starting from what I'll be covering today, is going to be part of the things I've talked about in my online course, which is the fundamental of live audio engineering. If you haven't signed up for the course, I'll put a link in this video. A lot of you are on the wait list, but I'm just taking a few people through the course. I'm trying to just get it properly filmed so I can just put it out there for everyone else. But the few I've taken, it's people seem to, the course makes more sense for some people when I'm taking it like live with them rather than just having the course film. But apparently, I'm finding it difficult to cover everyone who has signed up for the wait list. So I'll just film something and then put it out there. And if you do need something from me in terms of one-on-one class, then we can take that further. So this is going to be something similar, not exactly the course because it's going to be unfair, but the course is quite formal. This is the informal bit of just going through the very basic of live sound engineering. And I'll be talking about what sound is basically in this live stream, just the very physics of sound. And I think understanding that will give you an idea and will help you to be able to go through your mixing and even understand what you're looking for, some of the terms and things like that. To guide me in this course, I'll be going through using a material by Shure, which is the microphone company, called Audio Systems Guide for Houses of Worship. I probably should show that on the screen now. So I'll also put a link of this video when we're done with the live stream. So Shure Audio System Guide for Houses of Worship is, I mean, they talk a lot about short products in this very short, I don't know what to call it, if it's a book or a publication, but that's some very basic about sound that's really, really nice if you can just get into it. Lots of company that make audio equipment, they have like something similar, but I found that I had to refer to this short guide quite a few times, and it's really good what they have in here. So if we take a brief look at the table of content, you have like a few things they have here, but we'll be considering this whole part that talks about what sound is. And if we have time later in this course, I probably would go through a little bit of the comment session, what you guys have in the comments, but I don't know if I'll have time for it. But if I do, that would be great. Another thing I've done for this series and for my live streams is I've limited the comments to just channel members alone. So if you want to comment during the live stream, it will be great if I get a comment during the live stream, especially if it's a question. I'll definitely hold on what I'm saying and respond to the question. So it's a very good opportunity for you guys to reach out to me and ask me questions live, and then I get to answer it live. But that is a privilege for channel members. So, I mean, if you haven't joined channel membership, you should join. Uh, so a moment. So yeah, I thought I had to stop for a bit because I thought the sound wasn't working. I had to quickly look through my phone to see if the sound was working. So apologies for that. Yep. So what is sound basically is what we'll be talking about. And sorry. Okay, so we'll be talking about sorry, this a little bit. What is sound? And I'll be using this material as a guide just to show us what sound basically is and give us an idea of what I'll be talking about in this video. So sound basically is produced by vibrating objects such as musical instruments, loudspeakers, and of course the human vocal cords. The mechanical vibrations of this object push and pull sound in air, which is immediately adjacent to them, causing a series of cyclic pressure changes that travel outward from the object, forming a pattern called sound waves. These are all English, but basically sound waves sound basically is caused by vibration, including sound that comes from the human voice, the vocal cord, the vibrations in there, and then these vibrations interact with the air and move the air back and forth through a series of pressure changes, and then that causes sound waves, which of course we hear. So sound wave basically travel through air, and there is a speed of sound. You probably might have heard of this, and sound basically is categorized like we describe sound using three elements, the three elements that make up sound, which we use lots of times in live sound, and it's good to understand what these elements are that we use in live sound. So basically we've got the frequency, we've got the wavelength, and we've got the amplitude. I'm pretty sure you might have heard about this. This is an example of it, or a diagram of a basic sound wave. And so if I probably draw, which I mean, there we go. Yeah, can draw here. So this an example of a sound wave. It's not exactly like this, but let's just assume these are sound waves. So you have basically a sine wave here that represents our sound wave. The frequency of the sound wave, I'll link this material so you can have a read at it, but I'll just attempt to explain. The frequency of the sound wave basically is one cycle of the waves. So the wave starts from here. There's the beginning of the wave, and then goes positive, cuts through zero, and then goes back from negative back to zero. So from this point to this point is one cycle of the waves. So the frequency of the wave, of the sound wave, is the number of cycles per second, because frequency is measured in hertz, and hertz basically is cycles per second. So 1/second. It's an inverse of time. So the amount of cycles you have in 1 second in a sound wave determines the frequency of this sound wave. So let's assume this is 0 in terms of time, the x-axis, and then this is 1 second. And if you go, this is 2 seconds, for example. This sound wave does one cycle in 1 second. So we can say this is a 1 hertz. This sound wave has a 1 hertz, a frequency of 1 hertz. If this is 0 and this is 1 and this is 2 instead, in terms of time, this sound does half of a cycle in 1 second and does one cycle in 2 seconds. So this frequency will be said to have 0.5 hertz. And if this is 0.5, I'm just drawing too many things here, which is, and then this bit is 1 here. So this sound wave does one cycle in half of a second, and another cycle in the second half. So it does 2 cycles per second. That sound wave is said to have a frequency of 2 hertz. So that's basically what we say when we mention frequency of a sound wave. And the human ear, we are able to hear frequencies from 20 hertz, that's 20 cycles per second, up until 20,000 hertz, which is, or 20 kilohertz, that's 20,000 cycles per second. Seems like a lot, but that's about the frequency we are interested in when we talk of audio engineering. I mean, there are, if you're doing wireless transmission of other things, or Wi-Fi and other things, you're interested in frequencies in megahertz and gigahertz. We don't care about those in sound. And if you're, say, monitoring earthquake, for example, you are interested in frequencies of like 1 hertz or even less than 1 hertz, because earthquake travels in those very low frequencies. So for us in sound engineering or audio engineering, we're interested in frequencies between 20 hertz and 20 kilohertz. Now, the other term about sound that we usually use a lot is amplitude. Amplitude basically refers to the power of a sound wave. It talks about the height of the wave, which is the distance between here and the highest point of the wave. That's our amplitude. I mean, I'm using my mouse to draw. It's not very straightforward, and the amplitude also is like I said, it refers to the sound pressure level, which is the loudness, decides the loudness of the sound wave. So a similar sound wave of similar frequency but a bigger amplitude, similar to what I'm drawing right now on the screen, they've got the same frequency because they are doing the same amount of cycles per second, but this has a higher amplitude than this, which simply means this red wave would be louder than this green wave. So that's what amplitude is. And amplitude is measured in dB or decibels, which is the unit for measuring sound pressure wave. Now, the third uh, um, term in sound I'll talk about is the wavelength. Wavelength is measured in meters because it's measured in any unit of length. So, not just meters, you can measure in feet and inches and whatever it is. But let's just assume meters here, which is the standard unit for length, SI unit. So, wavelength is the distance the wave takes to make one complete cycle. So, this wave we're talking about starts its cycle here and ends one full cycle here. So the distance between this and this is one wavelength. Now, as you can see, there is a correlation or a relationship between the wavelength of a sound wave and its frequency. The frequency of the sound wave is how many times, how many cycles the sound makes in one, the wave completes, how many cycles it does in 1 second, while the wavelength is the distance of one cycle. So it definitely means that the lower the frequency of a sound is, the longer the wavelength compared to a higher frequency. So a higher frequency sound has a shorter wavelength compared to a lower frequency sound. For example, if I attempt to draw a sound wave here that's got twice the frequency of this one, so it's going to do one cycle half the time. So this is one cycle, and then, forgive my drawing, this is another cycle. So in the time the green wave takes to make one cycle, which is here and here, the red wave makes two cycles. So from here to here is one cycle, and from here to here is another cycle. And the wavelength of the green wave is the length of one cycle, which is from here to here. So let's call this 0 to 1. And the wavelength for the red wave is half of 1. So from here to here is one cycle, and the distance from here to here is the wavelength. So the red wave, the red sound wave, has a higher frequency because it does two cycles per time, which is per 1 second, compared to the green wave that does one cycle. So the red wave is twice the frequency of the green wave, but the wavelength of the red wave is shorter, which is half the wavelength of the green wave. So the higher the frequency, the shorter the wavelength. Now, one thing about wavelength that's very important for us in sound engineering is the shorter your wavelength, which simply means the higher the frequency of the sound, the easier it is to control, because the sound, before it gets to you, it does multiple wavelengths. So you can angle your speakers, for example, your high frequency speakers, to face a particular direction, and you'll be sure the sound is going to travel facing that direction, and everyone sitting off axis to that speaker or behind the speaker will barely hear anything, because the wavelength is very short. So the sound, the cabinet of the speaker is able to contain the sound without it going out. So wherever the sound is pointed, the speaker is pointing towards, this is where the sound will go through. But it's difficult for us to control sounds or frequencies, sound waves rather, that have longer wavelength, low frequency sounds, for example, which is why it's very difficult for us to control subwoofer frequencies. We have issues with subwoofers because it's got long. Some of the very low frequency sounds have very long wavelength, and when you position a subwoofer, irrespective of where you are, if the subwoofer is pointing towards you or is pointing away from you, you're going to get the feel of the sound equally because the wavelength is very long. And that's some of the issues we have with very small rooms or mixing in a studio. If it's almost like you can't really hear the sound of the subwoofer, that's because the time it takes for the low frequency of the subwoofer to complete one wavelength, it's longer than the length of the room. Even rather, I don't really mean time. I'm missing myself up here. The length of the wavelength of the low frequency sound is longer than the size of the room. So you get what you call sometimes standing waves, where the length of the room is about the same length of the wavelength of the sound wave that's coming from the speaker. And so the sound wave doesn't have enough time to complete one full cycle. Has the length of the wavelength, and the sound can't really bounce back and forth. It's just very difficult to contain. So that's why we're very careful with how we place subwoofers. And if you place multiple subwoofers or you're using more than one subwoofer in your venue and you don't place them the right way, you get issues of sound canceling out each other compared to high frequency sound. I mean, you can put lots of high frequency sound facing you, they can blast sound everywhere towards you, and you should be fine. You will get the sound somewhat. There won't be much cancellation in the space. But for subwoofer energy, if you have multiple subwoofers, you have to actually plan the subwoofer. You have to align them right, place them the right way, do some calculations to make sure you don't have sound cancelling out each other. That's why wavelength is very important. Now, moving on, just a little bit more on this material, direct sound versus indirect sound. We're going to talk about this, and then we're going to end this live stream on the inverse square law. Yeah, this is very straightforward. Sound travels in all direction, and for us in live sound, we want to get as much direct sound as possible compared to indirect sound, because sound bounces off of reflective surfaces. Just like light bounces off of surfaces, sound as well bounces off of surfaces. So, and there are reflective surfaces and there are surfaces that are not reflective. That's why you have issues of people tell you put sound panel in a room or put acoustic panels in a room. Why we say this is want to make the reflective surfaces as little as possible, so I'll have surfaces that absorb the sound rather than reflect the sound. And so we've got direct sound. So let's assume this is your sound source. It can be your speaker, it can be your loudspeaker in this case, it can be your voice, it can be your drum set or whatever it is. If you have a microphone that's picking up the sound, the microphone will not only pick up the direct sound, it will also pick up indirect sound. So if there is a wall close by, or you're miking a drum and there is a drum shield very close by, sound will travel from the cymbal using overhead microphone, for example. Sound will travel from the cymbal directly to the microphone, and sound will also travel from the cymbal, hitting the wall of the drum shield, hitting the floor of the drum booth, hitting the ceiling if the ceiling is very low as well, and then travel down to the mic. So you have the same sound being picked up, not just from the mic, but from not just directly from the sound source, but from other reflective surfaces. So that's the thing with direct and indirect source. So why is this important? This is very important because you need to be careful with how you place microphones. So the whole issue about microphone placement being key, the whole issue about limit reflective surfaces as much as possible is very important here because of how sound travels directly and indirectly. Just to be sure, what I have going online is what I think it is. I would attempt to watch the live stream again just to be sure. My bad. Here we go. So basically, it's now there's something about indirect sound and direct sound, which we'll talk about when we get to the inverse square law. The direct sound changes, but the indirect sound barely changes, which is very, what I mean by changes, I'm talking about the level or the volume of the sound. Because if me being in this room, for example, speaking into this microphone, let's assume the microphone is close to my mouth, so you're hearing me speak very clearly. And the microphone as well is also picking my sound bouncing off of this table back to the microphone. My sound, my voice bouncing off of the screen I have in front of me, bouncing off of the walls, the ceiling, and the floor back into the microphone. But you can barely tell that there are indirect sound because the direct sound, which is the sound of my voice coming to the microphone, is loud enough to overshadow everything. So when I gain this microphone because of how loud my voice, which is the direct sound, is hitting the microphone, I gain the microphone to an extent where it's good enough for the direct sound, and then the indirect sound is very low to the extent that the gain settings I've set for my voice is not gonna amplify the indirect sound. What happens then when I go back from this microphone or increase the distance between my voice or my mouth and the microphone? What then happens is the direct sound reduces in volume, but the indirect sound remains the same because the same way the sound is bouncing off of the walls and the ceiling and anything, wherever I am in this room, that's how it's still going to bounce and get to the microphone. And so what happens then at the end of the day is that the indirect sound remains the same, but the direct sound varies. That brings us to the inverse square law. This is one of the most important law in sound. As a matter of fact, I mean, there are lots of laws, but this is very important because I always refer to this when I speak to pastors or singers who have troubles using their mics the way I want them to use their mic. So you see pastors who put their mics here on their chin or on their chest, or using their mics as though you're drinking from a bottle with a straw, and so their mic is all the way to their chest here. Or you see people who eat their mic or whatever it is. This is why mic placement is very important, because the inverse square law says if you double the distance from the sound source to the microphone, you reduce the volume of the sound that gets to the microphone by 4, which is the square of 2. So if I double the distance of the if I double the distance from sound source to capturing device like the microphone, I quadruple the reduction in sound level. And a 3 dB increase in sound level is perceived as double the sound. So decibel, which is sound pressure measurement, is not a linear scale. It's a logarithmic scale or an exponential scale. So if a 3 dB increase, so a sound that is in at 6 dB, for example, if it becomes 9 dB, we perceive it as being twice as loud. So what happens is, if a mic is say 2 inches from the sound source, and then I take the mic 4 inches from the sound source, by that means doubling the distance from the sound source, what happens in the perceived loudness, or what is being captured, the amplitude of that sound wave decreases by 6 dB rather, which is a quadrupling of the sound reduction. That's what the inverse square law says. So here's an example of the inverse square law. This is the sound source, this bit here, and let's assume the whatever I say microphone or the sound is 76 dB at this position. From the sound source and the capturing device like a microphone is here, which is half a meter from the sound source, and it's at 76 dB. If you move the capturing device or the sound source away and double that distance from half a meter to 1 meter, the sound pressure level or the loudness drops from 76 dB to 70 dB, which simply means you have a 6 dB reduction. Remember, a 3 dB reduction means you've halved the volume, and a 6 dB reduction means you've reduced the volume by a factor of 4. That's perceived loudness, because a 3 dB increase is doubling the loudness. A 3 dB reduction means you have the loudness. It's how the human ear perceives sound, basically. So it's how dB works. So if you quadruple the distance, you've reduced the amount that you hear, the volume, by a factor of 4 raised to the power of 2. So that's basically how the inverse square law works, which simply means if you have a singer who struggles to hear themselves, or you struggle to gain their microphones properly, and they always keep their mic, the way they hold their mic is quite far away from their mouth. Just by getting the microphone a little bit closer will drastically affect how much sound you get. As a matter of fact, will double or even quadruple the loudness you get from the sound. Another thing we do with this whole inverse square law that guides how we work is how we place speakers. So for example, if I attempt to draw my caricatures again and use this space here, so let's assume this is a stage. This bit here is a stage, and this is the floor of the congregation. So you have seats here. This is one row of seats. This is another row of seats. This is another row of seats, and this is another row of seats. And then you have a speaker stand, loudspeaker stand here, and you have a loudspeaker here, like this. What happens here is sound gets here, and you also want that same sound to travel to the last row. The problem is, if the distance between the sound source, which is a loudspeaker, and this man sitting here is, let's say, 5 meters, and the distance between the loudspeaker and this guy sitting here is 20 meters. I know I'm not drawing this to scale, but I don't know whether you understand what I mean now. So the problem is the loudness is now different because the difference in level between this and this is 5 meters. Let's assume here is 10 meters. And if this is 10 meters, for example, this guy is hearing the sound that's coming from this speaker 6 dB lesser than this guy. So if the sound pressure at this man is about 80 dB, the sound pressure level at this man will be 74 dB, which is like the volume reduced by 4. In a live sound situation where the speakers are very, very loud, it might not be the end of the world, but it's still an issue. And if you, as a sound engineer, you are somewhere here mixing and you're trying to increase the speaker volume so you can hear a good level. The problem is this guy here, you're killing him because the sound at his ears is terrible. Like, it's too loud. He's finding it very difficult. I've seen lots of people stand up from the church because the sound is too loud at the front, and they just walk out. And this is because of the inverse square law. This is the reason why most times you see people who, if your ceiling is low, they have multiple zones of speakers. So you have a speaker here, and then let me use black for the speakers. So you have a loudspeaker here, and then you have another loudspeaker somewhere around here. So you can reduce the volume of the first speaker, and it just covers a zone of people here, and then the other speaker covers a zone of people around here as well. And if your hall is very long, then you can have multiple zones of speaker, an A zone, a B zone, and a C zone. Alternatively, what you see most times in large halls, large gatherings, large events, or corporate events, or professional events, is that the speakers are being flown very high. The reason for flying the speakers is not only for even coverage. It's basically, that's what it is, for even coverage. What even coverage means is you have a line of sight. Everyone has a line of sight to the speakers. And secondly, the sound is even. So what happens is, if I bring this speaker here and I hang the speaker up here, for example, so I have a line array system, and I have like a multiple line array here, and I hang the speaker. What happens is, I've increased the distance from the speaker to this first man here, and the distance from the speaker to the last man hasn't also changed much. So I've now, initially I had a 5 meter here and the 20 meters all the way to the back. Now I have about, say, a 15 meters down to this man here, and I have about a 20-25 meters down to this guy. I've now reduced the distance of the sound going from speaker to first man in front and from speaker to last man behind, which means I've now tried as much as possible to reduce the delta in distance, and by implication the sound pressure level, the sound loudness between the first man and the last man. So these are the things that we take into consideration. I mean, they are basic principles of sound. It's almost like, yeah, if you're in sound engineering, you should know it, but not everyone does. And these are the foundations of the things that affect the decisions we make, even at the very high level when designing sound systems, because we understand the principle from the very beginning. So yeah, these are the few things I wanted to cover about the fundamentals. I mean, we'll dive deeper into sound in general and go out of the physics bits later on. Again, if you joined a little bit late, what I've covered is from this publication by Shaw Academy. It's called Audio System Guides for Houses of Worship. I'll link it in the description of this video. I've covered what sound is, how sound is caused by vibration, and the three and vibration, and those vibration move air molecules, which then travels through space to give us a sound wave. And the sound wave is characterized by three terms. We use the frequency, which is the number of complete cycle the wave makes in 1 second, and then the amplitude, which determines the loudness of the sound. So that carries the weight or the power of the sound. More amplitude means more loudness, and amplitude is measured in decibels. And we talked about wavelength, how wavelength is related to frequency, because wavelength is the length in meters or feet or whatever your unit is the length of one full cycle of the wave. So a lower frequency sound has a longer wavelength, while a higher frequency sound has a shorter wavelength. We talked also about direct sound and indirect sound, how indirect sound in any given space is almost constant irrespective of where the sound source is, because the sound bounces off the reflective off all the reflective surfaces it can find there. But the direct sound rather, depends on the proximity of the sound source to the audio capturing device like your microphone. So what we aim for is to maximize the direct sound, and by so doing you minimize the indirect sound, because indirect sound is going to be there. If I take this microphone out of my mouth, these indirect sound, you're going to hear my voice less and hear more of the noise. Doesn't mean the noise wasn't there before. You couldn't hear the noise now because my voice is too loud to overpower the noise, and when I gain the microphone, I gain the microphone to my voice, and it simply means the indirect sound, which is the noise and my computer going everywhere, and the sound of my voice bouncing off of surfaces, isn't loud enough for you to make any noticeable difference, because the direct sound is pretty much close. And then we talked about the inverse square law, which is a very, very important law that guides our speaker placement, that guides how we use microphone, that guides how we mic instruments, and how we mic vocal, and how we mic almost everything. These are very, very important. And if you have the idea of how this thing works, and you apply them to your daily uh, sound stuff, I believe that will help you a lot. So as a take home, if you can go look at the church, look at how the speakers are placed, measure the distance from the speaker to the first person, and from the speaker to the last person, and then you understand how this thing go to affect the audio experience for different people in different seats. Also, you can also look at how you've placed microphones, whether you're capturing the right sound, and trying as much as possible to minimize um, indirect sound. There are ways technology has helped us to minimize indirect sound by giving us directional microphones and things like that. However, if we try as much as possible to work out putting the right capturing device, the microphone at the right source, we eliminate most of this issue. Again, I've limited comments in the video to people who are channel members alone. So if you want to comment on my live stream, then it'll be cool if you join the channel membership, because that's going to be my priority while I'm doing the video. If I get a question in the comment, I'll post what I'm saying and then attempt to answer the question, and then move on from there. Thank you for how many of you who joined this video live. I'm very grateful. It makes what I'm doing absolutely worth it. And if you've got any question after the video, obviously everyone can actually put their comments in there, and then it will guide me into making the next video, still on the whole topic of live sound, live audio 101, which is just me freestyling a few things I've talked about in my audio course. And yeah, just going through the very basics of live sound engineering, and then we'll go into some more serious stuff that most people are interested in. But I thought I should start from the very, very basic and the physics of sound and how it works. We've done quite a bit of time in the stream. I'm not sure we've got lots of time to really go through our comments. That probably might be a video for another time, going through comments and answering questions on that you guys have on the live stream. Thank you very much for sticking around till the end of this one. I'm grateful, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now.